Julia's husband Eduardo left her for her colleague Camila. Camila was much younger than Julia, a bright, very beautiful girl who had recently graduated from college. The woman's colleagues watched the whole situation with interest and conversations circulated around the office. Eduardo picked up his new girlfriend from work every night and Julia watched the lovers embrace through the window. He often came with a bouquet and Julia couldn't remember the last time Edward had given her a single rose. The two had a common marriage. They had a daughter who was in school. Eduardo earned good money after the divorce, left the apartment to his ex-wife and daughter and soon bought a new house. Eduardo's girlfriend ended up getting pregnant and Julia found out about the details of her colleagues who were talking close to her, thinking that she couldn't hear them. Julia was very upset to hear all this, but on the other hand, she managed to get on with her life. Deep down, she wanted to know every detail. She knew she was once as young as Camila was once, but she and Eduardo had been through a lot together and the marriage left hard feelings. After many years together, their youthful romance faded. They rarely went out to have fun. Eduardo no longer gave Julia presents and she didn't want to spend a lot of money because her husband worked a lot to earn it. Camila was the exact opposite of her. Woman, young and bright, wanted to dress fashionably, go to expensive events and dine in restaurants. In the first months after the separation, Julia often cried, lamenting the lost years and the broken family. She dreamed that Eduardo would change his mind or something would happen to Camila and he would come back to her. But time passed and Eduardo never returned. Soon Camila stopped working because the time of delivery was approaching. Julia no longer saw them at the end of the workday and it was easy and sad at the same time. It was easy because no one else was hurting her. Sad because she didn't see Eduardo anymore. She still loved her ex-husband. On a cold March night, she sat on the couch with a glass of wine, tears streaming down her cheeks. There was a very great sadness in his soul. She picked up the phone and dialed Eduardo's number. She didn't know why she did it. She just wanted to hear his voice. After a few seconds, he answered. Julia said hello and her voice shook. There was silence on the phone. Julia recovered and said that she felt very bad without him. Edward was silent. Finally, he told Julia never to call him again. He had a new family and hung up. Julia was paralyzed, unable to believe that he could so quickly forget everything they had lived together. She thought for a long time how unfair this world was, where families could be changed so easily. The woman gasped with anger at Eduardo and Camila, with pity for herself and her daughter, and a thirst for revenge. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and deleted Eduardo's number. She had to move on with her life. One day, on her way home, Julia bumped into her school friend. Carla looked very well dressed and was very happy to see her friend, who she hadn't seen for a few years. She called Julia to the nearest cafe when Julia told her about the latest events in family life. Carla shook her head indignantly, and then she firmly declared that she would help Julia come to her senses. So Carla actively took over her friend's life. Carla constantly wanted to do something or change something. The first thing they did was change the locks on the apartment. So Carla took Julia to her hairdresser. Julia didn't want to change anything about her appearance, but it wasn't easy to get rid of Carla. They transformed her long, lackluster hair into a luxurious hairstyle and dyed it a striking color. After that, Carla threw out of Julia's closet long skirts, loose sweaters and long dresses, elegant blouses with plunging necklines, fashionable clothes and dresses that flattered her figure appeared in her closet. At first, it was difficult for Julia to get used to her new look. In the mirror, she didn't look like a tired 40-year-old woman, but an elegant lady with a neat haircut and sparkling eyes. Along with the transformation, her interest in the life of her ex-husband and his new wife has slowly started to wane, according to office gossip. Julia knew they had a girl and that Camila and Eduardo started to fight, but that didn't bother her anymore. One night, Carla invited her to sit in a cafe and Julia happily agreed. They drank and talked about all kinds of topics. Suddenly, Carla received a message and after reading it, she winked at Julia. A minute later, a tall, handsome man came to their table. The piercing look in his light blue eyes immediately confused Julia. She had not communicated with men for a long time. Carla introduced the man as her colleague, who had just returned from a 6-month business trip. Daniel turned out to be an interesting person to talk to. He told funny and not so funny stories from life. He asked Júlia about her work and tastes. Júlia did not notice how time flew by and it was time to go home. Daniel asked to take Júlia home and she didn't mind. As a farewell, Carla winked at Júlia again. Daniel and Júlia walked slowly through the night city. The man said he was married, but his wife found an Italian man and they ended up getting divorced. Júlia immediately noticed how similar their stories were. She told him about her wedding and this time she didn't want to cry. After that night, they started seeing each other more often. He used to meet her at work, and they'd go to a cafe or a movie. On weekends, they went out of town, taking Júlia's daughter with them. Júlia was very happy that no one ever cared so much about her. One night, at a restaurant, Daniel got down on one knee in front of Júlia. He had a small red box in his hands. He opened it and the surprised woman saw a beautiful ring. Júlia and Daniel got married. It was a modest party but very charming. Carla was maid of honor, because it was thanks to her and her efforts that Júlia was happy again. One night, Júlia was making dinner and heard a creak in the door lock, as if someone was trying to open it. She went to the door and looked through the peephole. There was Eduardo, standing outside the door when she opened it. Eduardo looked at her sadly. Instead of greeting her, he asked why she had changed the locks. Then, without waiting for an answer, he entered the apartment, keeping his eyes on Júlia. He complimented her on her new look and Júlia proudly responded that the split was good for her. It was obvious that Eduardo had not expected such a situation. Finally he told her why did he come? Turns out he was tired of his new wife and their baby screaming and wanting attention. So he decided to go back to his peaceful life with Júlia and their grown daughter. Júlia could not believe her ears. She even laughed at his impertinence and, having calmed down, said that she was expecting a baby, because a child is happiness at any age. Eduardo stared at her without understanding and only then did he notice her belly. He turned pale and could only ask who the father was. Júlia looked firmly into his eyes and said that her son was from a loving husband. It was pathetic to look at Edward. He couldn't believe that his wife got married and was expecting a child. By this time Juno had had enough of this show and she said in parting that he should never come to her again. And then closed the door behind him, leaning against the door. Júlia stood still for a minute, thinking how the world went round. Then she went back to the kitchen to take the apple pie prepared for her beloved family out of the oven. If you liked this exciting story, then like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.